Stand up, now. You're being detained.
Detained for what, officer? Eating lunch isn't a crime.
You match a suspicious description. Hand over your ID.
You have no reasonable suspicion. Touch me.
The body camera footage was crystal clear, capturing the brilliant midday sun reflecting off the polished granite of the financial plaza. It showed everything: the manicured hedges, the bustling lunch crowd, and the moment a career ended before it had arguably even begun. Officer Kyle Reynolds had absolutely no idea that the man he was approaching, the man calmly eating a turkey sandwich on a public bench, wasn't just a corporate lawyer or a businessman. He was Marcus Thorne, a senior clerk for the United States Court of Appeals, a man who ghost-wrote opinions that defined the laws of this nation. Marcus wasn't panicking. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was simply existing in a space that Reynolds had decided he didn't belong in. And in about 20 minutes, the city of Chicago was going to face a civil rights lawsuit that would drain the municipal insurance fund and leave the police department scrambling for answers. Before we unravel this tangled mess of arrogance and legal retribution, I need you to do something for me. Go down to the comments section right now. Tell me where you're tuning in from, your city, your state, heck, your country. And here is the question of the day. Do you think law enforcement officers should be personally liable when they violate the Constitution? Give me a yes or no. And if you believe that the badge is a symbol of service, not a license to bully, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. You are not going to want to miss how this plays out. Marcus Thorne was a creature of habit and discipline. At 34 years old, he carried himself with the gravitas of a man twice his age. He was a Yale law graduate, top of his class, a former editor of the Law Review, and currently served as the right hand to one of the most formidable appellate judges in the Seventh Circuit. He dealt in the currency of logic, precedent, and absolute precision. That Tuesday afternoon, he had stepped out of the federal courthouse seeking a moment of respite from a grueling case regarding interstate commerce clauses. He found a quiet bench in the plaza, placed his leather briefcase embossed with his initials next to him, and unwrapped his lunch. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. He looked like exactly what he was: a highly successful legal professional. But that's not what Officer Kyle Reynolds saw. Reynolds was 27, 3 years on the force, and itching for action in a district that was usually quiet. He was patrolling in his cruiser when a call came over the radio. A concerned citizen had reported a suspicious male loitering near the bank entrance clutching a bag. The description was as thin as paper: black male, dark suit, sitting on a bench. No description of criminal behavior. No weapon seen. Just a man sitting. Reynolds, driven by boredom and an inflated sense of intuition, decided this was his moment to intervene. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb, the tires crunching against the concrete, and stepped out. He adjusted his belt, resting his hand near his holster, not drawing but signaling readiness, a threat implicit in the posture. Marcus didn't look up immediately. He was reading a printed brief, his mind deep in the nuances of the Fourth Amendment. He only acknowledged the officer when the shadow fell across his page. "Partner, I'm going to need you to stand up," Reynolds said. His voice wasn't asking, it was commanding. Marcus slowly lowered the sandwich. He marked his place in the brief with a finger and looked up. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We've had reports of a suspicious individual casing the bank. I need to see some identification." Marcus sighed internally. He knew this script. He had studied the case law that governed it, and he had written opinions on the qualified immunity that usually protected it. "Officer, I am eating my lunch. I am not casing a bank. Unless you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime, am committing a crime, or am about to commit a crime, I am not required to identify myself." Reynolds blinked. He wasn't used to pushback, certainly not from someone who spoke like a law professor. His jaw tightened. The young officer stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "I'm conducting an investigation.
That gives me the right to ID you. Now stop playing games, stand up and hand over your license." "I am not playing games," Marcus said, his voice level, devoid of fear. "I am exercising my rights under Brown v. Texas. You are operating on a hunch or perhaps a biased call from a passerby. That does not constitute reasonable suspicion. I suggest you return to your vehicle." It was a dismissal. A polite, articulate dismissal, but a dismissal nonetheless. And for a man like Kyle Reynolds, who wore his badge like a crown, it was an insult that could not be abided. The air in the plaza grew heavy. Bystanders, sensing the friction, began to slow down. A few phones came out. The stage was set for a disaster, but Reynolds was too blinded by his own ego to see the cliff he was walking off. "Listen here," Reynolds snapped, his voice rising, drawing more eyes to the scene. "You're detained. That means you do what I say. You're loitering in a high-security area with a suspicious package." He pointed a finger at the leather briefcase sitting innocently on the bench. "For all I know, there are tools in there to crack an ATM, or maybe something worse. Now get up, or I will make you get up." Marcus Thorne looked at the officer, really looked at him. He saw the impatience, the lack of training, the dangerous cocktail of authority and ignorance. He stood up slowly, brushing a crumb from his trousers. He stood 2 inches taller than Reynolds. "I am standing because I am finished with my lunch, not because you ordered me to," Marcus said. "And regarding my detention, you are making a grave error. Terry v. Ohio requires more than an inchoate and unparticularized suspicion or hunch. You have nothing. If you continue this, you will be violating my civil rights under color of law." "I'm done listening to your lecture," Reynolds growled. He unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, send me a backup unit. I've got a non-compliant subject at the plaza, possible 1031. The crowd had grown now. A woman in a business suit stopped about 20 feet away and held her phone high, recording. Marcus noted her presence and gave a slight nod, a universal signal to keep rolling. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly for the microphones recording him. "I am asking you to articulate the crime you suspect me of. Loitering is not applicable here. I am utilizing public furniture for its intended purpose during business hours. Casing a bank is a subjective interpretation of a man sitting near a building. You are profiling me, and you are doing it on camera." Reynolds stepped into Marcus's face. "I'm not profiling you. I'm doing my job. And right now my job is to find out who you are and what is in that bag." He reached for the handle of the briefcase. Marcus's hand shot out, not to strike, but to cover the clasp of the case. "Do not touch that," he commanded. The authority in his voice was startling. It wasn't the shout of a suspect. It was the gavel bang of a judge. "That briefcase contains privileged federal judicial documents. They are the property of the United States Court of Appeals. You do not have the clearance, the warrant, or the probable cause to open that case." Reynolds froze for a split second, the words, "federal judicial documents," bouncing off his brain. But he was too far down the road of aggression to reverse course. To back down now, in front of the recording phones and the watching crowd, would be a humiliation. He chose the path of destruction. "That's it," Reynolds said. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and interfering with a police investigation." "There is no investigation," Marcus stated calmly. "There is only harassment." Reynolds grabbed Marcus's wrist. He spun the man around with unnecessary force. Marcus did not resist. He didn't pull away. He allowed his arms to be pulled behind his back. He felt the cold steel of the handcuffs ratchet tight against his skin. "You have the right to remain silent." Reynolds began to recite the adrenaline, making his voice shake slightly. "I am aware of my rights," Marcus interrupted. "Better than you are, evidently. I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right to silence and my Sixth Amendment right to counsel. I do not consent to any search of my person or my property." Reynolds ignored him. He finished cuffing Marcus, and then, with a smug look of triumph, he bent down and snatched the leather briefcase.
We'll see what the feds have to say about what's in here, Reynolds muttered. You have just seized sealed appellate briefs and draft opinions. Marcus said, his face pressed against the side of the patrol car, now the heat of the metal against his cheek. You have violated the separation of powers doctrine. You have detained a federal officer. Officer, I want you to remember this moment. This is the moment you lost your career. Reynolds laughed. Actually laughed. Yeah, tell it to the judge, buddy. I intend to, Marcus whispered to himself. I intend to tell it to the chief judge. Reynolds shoved Marcus into the back of the patrol car. The plastic seat was hard, the space cramped. The smell of stale sweat and industrial cleaner filled Marcus's nose. He sat upright, maintaining his dignity even in chains. Through the plexiglass, he watched Reynolds toss the briefcase, the case containing sensitive documents regarding national security and constitutional interpretation, onto the front passenger seat like it was a bag of gym clothes. The drive to the precinct was a study in contrasts. In the front seat, Officer Reynolds was riding an adrenaline high, tapping his steering wheel, convinced he had just taken a dangerous criminal off the streets. He was rehearsing his report in his head. Subject was belligerent, refused lawful orders, claimed to be a federal agent. He figured he'd get a commendation. In the back seat, Marcus Thorne sat in silence. He was not fuming. He was calculating. He was building the file in his mind. Count 1, unlawful seizure. Count 2, unlawful arrest. Count 3, excessive force. Count 4, retaliatory arrest in violation of the First Amendment. He memorized the turns they took. He memorized the time on the dashboard clock. He looked at the back of Reynolds's head and felt a profound sense of pity. This young man had destroyed his life over a sandwich and a suit. They arrived at the precinct, the 4th District Station, a brick fortress in the middle of the city. Reynolds parked the car and hauled Marcus out. He paraded him through the back entrance, past other officers who looked up with mild interest. A well-dressed man in cuffs was not a common sight, but not unheard of. White-collar crime, maybe. Embezzlement. Reynolds brought him to the booking desk. Sergeant Thomas Miller was on duty. Miller was 55, a dinosaur in the department with gray hair and eyes that had seen every lie ever told. He looked up from his computer as Reynolds approached, shoving Marcus toward the counter. "What do we have here, Reynolds?" Miller asked, his voice gravelly. "Interference, obstruction, failure to ID," Reynolds said proudly. "Guy was casing the Plaza Bank, refused to cooperate, claimed he's got federal documents in his bag." Reynolds slammed the briefcase onto the counter with a thud. Miller looked at Marcus. He saw the expensive suit, the silk tie, the calm demeanor. He saw the way Marcus looked back at him, not with fear, not with anger, but with expectation. "Name?" Miller asked Marcus. "My identification is in my wallet," Marcus said softly. "Inside my jacket pocket. I consent to you retrieving my identification for the purpose of booking only." Reynolds reached into Marcus's pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He tossed it to Miller. Miller opened the wallet. The first thing he saw was a driver's license. Marcus Aurelius Thorne. Then he flipped the flap. There was a badge, not a police badge. A gold shield with the seal of the United States Courts. Below it, a laminated ID card. United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit. Senior Clerk. Security clearance top secret. Miller froze. He looked at the ID. He looked at the badge. He looked at the briefcase on the counter. He saw the small gold-embossed seal on the leather near the handle, property of the U.S. Judiciary. Miller felt a cold drop of sweat roll down his spine. He looked up at Reynolds, who was still smiling, waiting for a pat on the back. "Reynolds," Miller said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Did you open this bag?" "Not yet, Sarge. Figured we'd do it here. Inventory it." "Do not touch it," Miller hissed. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at Marcus. "Sir, you work for the circuit court." "I am the senior clerk to Judge Eleanor Vance," Marcus said. "That briefcase contains draft opinions on 3 pending federal cases. If that bag has been opened, or if the chain of custody has been compromised, Officer Reynolds has committed a federal felony." Reynolds' smile vanished. "Sarge, he was acting suspicious. He wouldn't ID." "Shut up," Miller snapped. "Shut up right now." Miller walked around the desk. He didn't ask Reynolds for the key to the cuffs. He pulled out his own. He walked behind Marcus and unlocked the handcuffs with shaking hands. "What are you doing?" Reynolds asked, bewildered. "He's under arrest." "He's not under arrest," Miller said, his face turning red. "He's a federal official, you idiot. You just arrested a man who works for the people who put us in prison." Miller looked at Marcus. "Sir, I am going to ask you to step into the captain's office. Right now." Marcus rubbed his wrists. He adjusted his cufflinks. He picked up his briefcase, checking the seal. It was intact. He looked at Reynolds, whose face was slowly draining of color. "I will speak to your captain," Marcus said, "but I am keeping my property with me." "Of course, sir," Miller said. "Right this way." Captain Henderson was in his office reviewing budget reports when his door opened without a knock. He looked up, annoyed, ready to dress down whoever had intruded. He saw Sergeant Miller, looking pale, ushering in a black man in a sharp suit who was rubbing his wrists. Behind them, Officer Reynolds looked like he was about to vomit. "What is this?" Henderson demanded, standing up. "Captain?" Miller said, "Officer Reynolds brought this gentleman in for obstruction. This is Mr. Marcus Thorne. He is the senior clerk for the U.S. Court of Appeals." Henderson's eyes went wide. He looked at Marcus. He knew the name. The Thorne family had been legal royalty in the state for 2 generations, and Judge Vance, she was known as the Hammer. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, coming around his desk, hand extended. I apologize. There must be a misunderstanding." Marcus did not take the hand. He stood tall, the briefcase gripped firmly in his left hand. "There is no misunderstanding, Captain. There is a deprivation of rights. Officer Reynolds detained me without reasonable suspicion, arrested me for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights, used excessive force, and seized confidential federal property. I have been in handcuffs for 45 minutes. Henderson turned his gaze to Reynolds. The look was withering. "Reynolds, outside, now." "But Captain, he wouldn't—" "Out!" Henderson roared. Reynolds scrambled out of the room. Miller closed the door. "Mr. Thorne," Henderson said, his tone shifting to damage control. "Please sit down. Can I get you some water? I am sure we can clear this up. Officer Reynolds is zealous, young. We can handle this internally." "Captain," Marcus said, his voice cold and hard like steel. "I am not here to negotiate. I am here to inform you of what is about to happen. I am going to walk out of this station. I am going to call the United States Marshal Service to report the seizure of this briefcase. Then I am going to call Judge Vance, and then I am going to call my attorney." "Mr. Thorne, please," Henderson pleaded. "We can expunge the arrest record immediately. It never happened." "It did happen," Marcus said. "It happened in front of 50 people. It happened on body camera. And it happened because your officer believes that a black man in a suit is inherently suspicious. You cannot expunge bias, Captain. You can only root it out." Marcus turned to the door. "I want the body camera footage preserved. I want the dispatch logs preserved. If 1 second of that footage goes missing, I will add a spoliation of evidence claim to the federal lawsuit that is being drafted as we speak." "We will preserve everything," Henderson said, defeated. Marcus walked out of the office. He walked past the booking desk. He saw Reynolds sitting on a bench, head in his hands. Marcus didn't stop. He walked out the front doors of the precinct into the afternoon sun. He took a deep breath. Then he pulled out his phone. He didn't call the media. He didn't call his family. He dialed the number for the chief judge's chambers.
Chambers, this is Sarah. Sarah, it's Marcus. Please inform the judge I will be late returning from lunch. I was arrested.
You were what?
I was arrested. And Sarah, tell the judge to clear her schedule for tomorrow. We're going to have a meeting with the city attorney.
The fallout was not swift. It was immediate. By Wednesday morning, the lawsuit Thorne versus City of Chicago had been filed. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, 25 pages of scathing constitutional analysis. It didn't just allege misconduct. It dissected the police department's training manuals and exposed the systemic rot that allowed Officer Reynolds to exist. The video footage was released 2 weeks later. It went viral within hours. The sight of the calm, articulate man being manhandled by the aggressive young officer was impossible to defend. Legal experts went on cable news to break down exactly how badly Reynolds had messed up. Officer Kyle Reynolds was placed on administrative leave. The internal affairs investigation was brutal. They found that Reynolds had a history of bad stops where the reasonable suspicion was non-existent. But he had never stopped a federal clerk before. He had never stopped someone who knew the rules better than he did. 6 weeks after the incident, Reynolds was terminated for cause. He lost his pension. He lost his career. The settlement came 3 months later. The city didn't want this going to discovery. They didn't want Marcus Thorne deposing the chief of police. They cut a check for $850,000. Marcus didn't buy a new car. He didn't go on vacation. He took the entire $850,000 and established the Thorne Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation for indigent men and women arrested for obstruction when asserting their rights. Marcus returned to his desk at the Court of Appeals. He continued to write opinions, but something had changed. He wrote with a new fire, a deeper understanding of the fragility of liberty. He knew that the Constitution was just paper unless there were people willing to stand in the fire and defend it. But here is the thing that keeps me up at night. Marcus Thorne won because he was Marcus Thorne. He won because he went to Yale. He won because he had a federal badge in his pocket. He won because he knew the magic words to say. What happens to the man who is just a carpenter? What happens to the nurse coming home from a double shift? What happens to the kid who is just scared? They get the cuffs, they take the ride, and sometimes they don't come back. Marcus Thorne stood up for himself, and in doing so, he stood up for all of us. But the system shouldn't require you to be a legal genius just to eat a sandwich in peace. So I want to leave you with this. When you see a video of an arrest, when you see someone standing their ground, ask yourself, are they being difficult? Or are they being a patriot? Because in this country, asserting your rights is the most patriotic thing you can do. Thanks for reading this story. If it made you think, if it made you angry, or if it gave you hope, please share it. Send it to a friend. Post it on your timeline. We need to keep these conversations going. And don't forget to subscribe. We have more stories to tell, and we can't tell them without you. Do you think the settlement was enough? What would you have done in Marcus's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe out there, folks, and know your rights.